Hello, and welcome to another episode of Legacy's Allure, brought to you by MTG Training Grounds, the educational series dedicated to providing you with all the info on popular decks, strategies, insight, and more for the Legacy format. I'm your host, Zachary Cook. Legacy is a format where you can express yourself, not only in your deck choice, but in the specific version of a card you use. The artwork, alterations, language, foils, you name it. The possibilities are numerous and allow people to connect with their deck and make it unique. For this episode, we have a guest who personifies taking a deck and making it your own. What deck, you might ask? High Tide. Not too long ago, High Tide was fairly common in the world of competitive Legacy, and one player in particular has the background to discuss it. To her name, she has an astonishing 10 Star City Game Open top 16s, one of which resulted in a win. She's a very active member of the online Legacy community and can be found on MTG The Source under the username Feline. She's written plenty of primers for some of the format's most iconic decks and is always there to help out newer players adjust to the format. She's an altarist and recently an MTG-related video series content producer. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming today's guest, Feline Longmore. Feline, welcome to Legacy's Allure.
Hi, you're really good at that.
I get a lot of practice.
That was awesome just to watch.
Well, welcome to the show. Like I said, we're going to be talking about High Tide, and I don't know if there's a person who personifies that deck more than you. We had a lot of requests for it, and every time it was the same name. You got to get Feline Longmore. So,
Really?
for what it's worth, you are synonymous with this deck. So, for better or for worse, the honor is all yours. And if you would do us the pleasure, why don't you kick things off? What is the High Tide deck? And let's keep it sort of at a 1,000-foot level. Let's talk philosophy of the deck, kind of how it works, and where it came from.
Okay. Dang, just what you said makes me want to ask you a bunch of questions. Well, the deck at its core is a combo deck. The deck doesn't really change at its core. It's always going to be running some number of High Tides, draw spells, islands, and cantrips, and counter spells to back that up because of disruption. They can come early or during the combo turn. And the way to win is it is a mill deck. Some people just like to play stuff that's different, whether it's poison or mill or an alternative win, and it is considered a mill deck. But you usually target with Blue Sun Zenith to draw them out for more cards in their library, because that's one way that you can win when an opponent can't draw a card. And the other way you can win is with Brain Freeze, but it's not the go-to route because they can still get an upkeep and like lightning bolt you after they untap before they draw. And then there's other times where you can Brain Freeze into Emrakul and they just get their deck back. So you're primarily targeting Blue Sun Zenith out of the sideboard with Cunning Wish, which comes from the main deck. And then that's about as simple as an explanation as that gets.
Well, that's all right. No, yeah. And when we'll go into more of the specifics and the details about how the deck works. So let's hit on some of the key spells. You've already named a few, but let's hit them one at a time. And for some of the older cards, let's specifically talk about like how they work, what they do, and why they're important to the deck. So kick it off. Let's start with High Tide. Obviously, that's the most important one.
Okay, yeah, if you want to name off cards, I'm totally cool with following your lead on that.
Go ahead.
Obviously, High Tide, you cast High Tide, your islands will tap for an additional amount of, all islands, I should say, will tap for an additional amount of mana, and then you will utilize the ability to untap, to tap, and put more mana in your pool. And what your goal is to get as much mana in your pool so that you can continue on to use more draw spells and to eventually get to the kill. But for every High Tide you cast, every island in play taps for an additional blue until end of turn, and it's an instant.
Awesome. I think probably the next most important spell on the list has got to be Time Spiral, which is sort of the linchpin piece outside of High Tide. So hit that one.
That is one of the cards that was banned. It was unbanned, I want to say 2011, because that's when the Hatfields brought it back and it started performing. But what Time Spiral does is it's a mega draw spell that draws both sides, but your deck is set up so that if both sides shuffle their library away and their hand away and draw 7 cards, you're going to benefit more than the opponent, because obviously it's your turn. You're going to be able to cast everything. They can only cast instants. Most of their disruption, other than counter spells, is going to be dead. And Time Spiral, also, you're drawing 7 cards. Usually when you first start the combo off, you're narrowing down cards in your hand so that you can fight through disruption to combo off, and then once you resolve the first time spiral, you're I don't know if 90% would be the right number to say in winning. Once you resolve time spiral, maybe overall as a whole, you're about 90% to win, but it also depends on the matchup. If there's no disruption, you're higher to win. If there is disruption, it can be more difficult. But time spiral untaps allows you to get new cards, and because you're untapped, you have new mana to keep going. So once you resolve time spiral, you're probably good. So it's definitely the primary spell after High Tide.
Yeah, and I'll just add in here that the real synergy behind the High Tide deck is the fact that your islands tap for more than one mana, so all of these untapped spells actually produce mana in the long term, and then, like Feline alluded to earlier, you're going to generate a really large amount of mana, and then that sort of fuels your kill condition. So I think next up, as far as when I think of High Tide, is probably Candelabra of Thanos, I think it is. That's the sort of the big mana engine artifact. So we'll go into that one.
Candelabra is a tough one. Not to explain, but it's tough for people to get because of the cost. One of the things I do is I watch the market a lot because I'm very involved in the game. Mm-hmm. And Candelabra finally hit a spike. It is, if you don't have your candles now, it's going to be even more expensive, but that's another story. Mm-hmm. But if you have your candles, congratulations. As far as candles go, the really nice thing about candles, and the reason why I argue to play them and to max out on them, is because when you play them, you can play them before the combo turn, so it costs 1 to cast. And because you're not having to pay that mana during the combo turn, it's costing you less mana during the combo turn, which is important because you're going to be fighting through disruption. Mm. Also, with an untapped candle in play, when you time spiral, it's kind of like having a turnabout on the side that is part of your hand in addition to the 7 that you draw. So if you have an untapped candle in play, when you time spiral, you don't lose it. You get to keep that untap effect, whereas turnabouts in your hand are shuffled away. This is one of the number of reasons, there's probably like half a dozen reasons why I would argue that you should run Candle if you can get them, because another example would be Thalia, Guardian of, I can't say the full name of the card for some reason.
Guardian of Thraben, yeah.
That's the one. I wanted to say Theros for some reason. But yeah, Thalia, if you play a Candle early, then they bring down a Thalia. You don't have to pay extra mana. It's already in play. It's cheap. And on top of that, you can, when you're paying to activate the Candle, you don't have to worry about Thalia's plus effect. You have to worry about cards like Null Rod and things that will go after your Candle, like Pithing Needle. And if they're going to be spending time trying to stop you from using your candles, if they're going to be like, I'll play a turn 2 Null Rod, then they're not playing a turn 2 Thalia or different things like that, and you're getting more turns. And the longer that you're alive, the more likely you are to combo off, and the more likely you are to win, because you want to hit 3 to 4 islands in play, and that I'm going off the rails a bit here.
Are you good?
That definitely helps with that.
Okay. Now you actually mentioned, excuse me, another spell, Turnabout, which I've seen the numbers of those vary in High Tide lists, but I feel like that's probably a fairly important one to sort of the combo engine of the deck as well. So what is Turnabout? How does that one work? Candelabra
and Turnabout are essentially the same spell, but not completely. They both have different things that you can benefit from. The nice thing about Turnabout, and one reason why people will run a max number of Turnabouts, is because you can use Turnabout to tap out your opponent on their turn, essentially fogging them or fogging their turn or time walking them. If they have creatures and they're going to kill you, you can tap them out and then buy one more turn. But the really nice thing about Turnabout is you can tutor for it with Merchant Scroll and Cunning Wish, both from the main deck and the sideboard. The reason why I don't max out on Turnabout, I only run one main and one side, is because Turnabout costs 4 mana to cast, and at any point where I'm going to be doing Turnabout, that means the previous turn or on that same turn, like on turn 2, I can cast Merchant Scroll. To get Turnabout, I'm not going to be able to Turnabout on my second turn anyway, and same thing for Cunning Wish. I'm not going to be able to Turnabout on my third turn unless I'm comboing off that turn. But Turnabout is really good because it's an untap effect that has utility, and you can tutor for it.
Yeah, and actually it's worth noting that not only can Turnabout untap your lands or your artifacts in the case of Candelabra, but you, like you mentioned, you can also use it to tap all of that permanent type. So you could like tap down all of your opponent's lands if you're worried about Flusterstorms or something of that nature that could hamper your combo turn. What about you mentioned Merchant Scroll? I know that's sort of the demonic tutor of the deck. So let's hit on Merchant Scroll.
Okay. Since you mentioned Turnabout, I have to say one last thing
Sure.
that I forgot. Then another thing you can do with Turnabout in relation to what you said is you can tap out the opponent or attempt to tap them out at the end of their turn or even during your own turn. And then if they, in response, tap for mana, if you set yourself up to have all your islands untapped and no mana floating, you use your last 4 mana and you pull to Turnabout them. If it resolves, they tap for mana so they can prepare to use their counter spells, and then you say, okay, declare the attack step. Their mana goes away, and then you don't have to worry about Flusterstorm. Flusterstorm is one of the most dangerous counter spells, so that is a point I should make while I remember it, because I'm not going to remember everything.
That's fine.
But going back to Merchant Scroll, that is definitely one of the most powerful cards in the deck because it allows you to get pretty much everything but Time Spiral, and even with Merchant Scroll, you can tutor for a tutor to get 3 Time Spirals so that you can cast one of them, which is Merchant Scroll into Cunning Wish, into Intuition from the sideboard, into 3 Time Spirals, which is a lot, but if you're in the middle of comboing off, you can afford it once you start going. And if you're not fighting against a deck it's a combo deck that's gonna be faster, you'll probably have time for it. You can start out with a hand where you have everything but Time Spiral, and you can turn 2 Merchant Scroll into turn 3 Cunning Wish. At the end of their turn, do Intuition for 3 Time Spirals, and then you start comboing off after that. Because you're probably not going to want to combo off until turn 4 or later anyway. You only want to combo off turn 3 if you're under the gun and you have to.
Right, and I guess that's probably worth mentioning here is we've talked a lot about making mana and all these different spells, but the real crux of the deck, or sort of the limiting factor, is that you have to have sort of a critical mass of kickstarting mana. So that typically is 4 islands, right? Like less than 4 islands is possible, but very difficult. And I would argue that anything 4 or greater makes it very likely that barring a lot of disruption from the opponent, you're almost certainly going to be able to chain enough spells together and produce enough mana. So this is sort of a turn 4 deck, if you will. But it's not a naked turn 4. Like you actually have a lot of permission and stuff as well. So while we're on it, let's talk permission. I know Force of Will and Flusterstorm are really common, so hit those. And I don't know if there are any others, but if there are, mention them as well.
For me, I mean, Force of Will is, it's a legacy card before anything. So automatically in a mono blue deck where you're a combo deck, Force of Will is probably going to be included. There's not very many decks that play blue that don't run Force of Will. As far as the other one, which is Flusterstorm, originally when I started out, I was looking at a lot of lists and people weren't maxing out on Flusterstorm. And what I really like about it is it stops early disruption in the form of discard, and it stops opposing combo decks like Ad Nauseam, Tendrils. It can do things against Belcher. It can do against discard as well. And this is just stuff that you can do before the combo turn. During the combo turn itself, it also works against counter spells, which is really nice. So there's a lot of leeway with the card, and I think it's worthy running. Some people will run Spell Pierce in place of some of them, and the only benefit is that you can use Spell Pierce to hit Sneak Attack and Liliana of the Veil. There isn't too much more, and I think giving up the power of Flusterstorm isn't worth doing over that, because if you Spell Pierce a Show and Tell early, they can counter it back. But if you Flusterstorm if they do Show and Tell in response, you Brainstorm, it resolves, then you Flusterstorm, you're Flusterstorming for 3 against a combo deck, and they can't just Force a Will or counter that back. Usually, if they don't have the mana to pay for it, it's going to be it's like a pseudo hard counter. It's not technically it's countered. There's nothing you can do about it, but it's much harder to stop with. Oh, I have a Force Will in my hand, but there's like 2 more copies, and I don't have the mana to deal with all that. So it's really, I like it because in addition to what it does, it also does what it does better than most counter spells in the situations where it's prime.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I really like I play Infect, and I really like Flusterstorm out of the sideboard, not only to fight combo decks, but also against the decks that load up on permission, because just like you said, it's really good at winning counter fights, and sometimes that's all you really want to do. I would argue that the only major benefit in my mind from like High Tide's perspective of Spell Pierce over Flusterstorm is, like you said, anything that is going to hamper your combo but isn't another counterspell. So something maybe like Thorn of Amethyst or Chalice of the Void, those kind of like permanent artifact or enchantment-based disruption, and then like you mentioned, planeswalkers like Liliana of the Veil, since this is sort of a critical mass hand-based combo deck. So.
Yeah, the thing that's nice against Liliana is you're a brainstorm deck. You're also running top. Some versions are also running tops, so you have the ability to stack the top of your deck against discard with all the cantrips.
Hmm.
And I forgot what you just said. Damn it, that really sucks. Um, yeah. Either way, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, another good point we should mention here is that, like like most blue decks, period, in Legacy, but especially blue-based combo decks, you're going to be running some or all of the cantrip cartel. So Brainstorm, Ponder, Preordain, and sometimes even things like Gitaxian Probe or some of the lesser used cantrips. So I think we've discussed those on this podcast enough that people know what they do, and it's important. The most important thing to note with regards to High Tide is you're trying to find high tides and the untap effects. So your cantrips do exactly what they do in almost all combo decks: is try and find those pieces, set up the pivotal turn, and then you go for it. So let's. Is there any? I was going to ask. Is there any other spells that I may have missed, like really important ones? I think I hit most of the iconic ones, but there might be a few other really important things I'm missing.
You have islands, you have fetch lands, you have cantrips, you have Cunning Wish, Merchant Scroll, Force of Will, Fluster Storm, Time Spiral, an untap effect in Candelabra and Turnabout, and High Tide. After that, it's sideboard cards, which is just going to be kill conditions, more disruption, more card draw, and then usually you'll have 3 to 5 slots, maybe 6 slots in the sideboard that are actual sideboard cards. And for me, myself, I run a counterbalance setup because if you resolve a counterbalance early, they have to fight through it. If you don't resolve it early, it gets disruption out of their hand, and that still helps. So,
good point. All right, so I was going to say, now that we sort of know what the deck looks like, and we've alluded to how it wins, let's talk through sort of the ideal line, just in a general sense. How do you go about winning with High Tide? Like, what does that turn 4 go off look like?
You will start out by casting. It would be your turn 4, so you wouldn't have an island, so you wouldn't turn about the previous turn on them. Starting out with the combo, you're probably going to start with a High Tide first. It's pretty rare that you'd start with anything else because you want your islands tapping for as most mana as possible, as early as possible. So you start out with High Tide. If they have disruption, you set yourself up to back it up with Force of Will or Fluster Storm. If it's essentially disruption free, the next thing you're going to do is probably tap and untap. If you have Turnabout, if you have Candelabra in play, you don't want to use your candles until you have to. So if you can High Tide and then Time Spiral, the easiest combo would be cast High Tide, it resolves, tap 3 more islands, get 6 mana because each island casts for 2, and then you would hard cast Time Spiral and then untap 4 lands, discard hand and graveyard into library, and then draw a new 7. If you have a candle in play and you didn't use your candle, your islands are untapping, and you can tap your islands and potentially tap for more High Tides before you ever even have to touch your untap effects. And then the only thing that would happen in between that would be disruption, like counters and whatnot. That's why you want to last as long as possible. If you can wait till turn 5, turn 6, you don't need to wait till turn 20 against most decks. But I'm very, very, very controlly when I play the deck. Like probably more so than I should be. There's probably games I've not won or there's probably games I've lost because I could have comboed off on like turn 6 or something, and I waited till turn 9 to make sure I had more counter spells. And if I would have comboed off in one of those turns, they might have drawn into counter magic later that ended up stopping me. But I like going off when I know that I have as many counters as possible. I like going off as safely as possible. So what you want to do is set yourself up to go off with High Tide and Time Spiral, but pick up as many counter spells as you can along the way.
Okay. And then after the first Time Spiral, occasionally it can fizzle out or you can have trouble, but a lot of times it appears it becomes fairly academic. You cast another High Tide or cast a Merchant Scroll, find another High Tide, get your islands up to the point where they're 3, 4, even more mana per island, and then simply the combination of untapping them, drawing more cards with things like Blue Sun Zenith, targeting yourself, or the time spiraling multiple times. You sort of set up the whole chain of events like that, and then, like you alluded to earlier, the most common way of finishing this is getting probably upwards of 70 or 80 mana and casting a single Blue Sun Zenith targeting your opponent because it can target either player and making them draw 50 or more cards and decking them. So it's it sounds complicated, and if you've ever watched Feline on video, it can get a little hairy trying to keep up with what's going on, but the actual premise of it is actually relatively simple. It's just make a whole lot of mana and then do something really broken with it, which is not new to Magic. That's been around for a long time. So, so why play High Tide? Why do you enjoy it? What makes it appeal to you?
Because I'm crazy.
All right. Besides your,
I don't know any other reason that I've ever been able to come up with as an answer for playing that deck. Before I even started playing it back in 2012, I got back into Magic after stopping for a few years. I started playing, and when I came back, Mental Misstep was in the format. It was before it got banned, but after it was out, I had a bunch of old cards, and I saw that things had changed, things had cost more. I could utilize it to update some stuff and make some new decks. I eventually got onto High Tide, but I knew when I did, it wasn't the best deck. I did a lot of metagaming, and at the time it was Rug, and it was Maverick, and it was Stoneforge Mystic base decks, which once Mental Misstep was banned, then High Tide got a little bit better, but during Mental Misstep it was terrible. But either way, as far as playing it goes, I sat down and I just started goldfishing it, and I'm like, this is insane. I feel like it's kind of like if you're playing Magic and you're juggling, everyone's, a juggler juggles 3 balls. This is like juggling like 100. It's just stupid. But it's so ridiculous when it works. It's just like, I guess if you like doing crazy stuff and putting stuff together that shouldn't happen and just being crazy, that is probably one of the reasons why I'm compelled to it. I have always liked combo decks. I also feel that for me, it's an easier deck to play. There's so much variance in Magic, and there's so many things that come into play that, like, you want your deck to be supreme. You don't want to when people say what's a budget version of High Tide to run or a budget version of any deck, it's like you really need to just play the best deck in the form. Not in the format, but if you're playing to win, you probably should be playing the best deck in the format. It does make sense. But what you want to do is you want to be supreme in every aspect that you can. And so playing this deck, it wasn't so much about, I think it's the best deck in the room. For me, it's just I enjoy it and it's good enough. And that's one of the things that I really like about Legacy is there are so many decks that you can play. They might not all be tier 1 or tier 1-5, but there's always like at least 2 or 3 dozen tier 2 decks running around, and there's stuff going in and out of that all the time. And it's just, the format is great. I wish things were better for the format. There's things that make it hard to play, but I'll always be a promoter of Legacy as far as it goes. And the fact that it has a home somewhere, I mean, that's all we can ask for at this point. So,
well, and actually, you hammered in on a point we make on this cast all the time, is that Legacy is a format that really favors people who know their deck, not just picking the best deck, because you gain way more advantage from being really good at your craft than you do from always trying to pick the best deck in the room. So. And that once again, it's almost comical how often I hear that from players, that the most important thing you can do is pick something you're really good at it and stick with it. So.
Yeah, I've been told the same thing. I don't really know if there's much I can add to that. That was pretty well put.
Well, like I said, my listeners are probably tired of hearing me at this point, but it's true. Get good at what you like and what appeals to you, and Legacy will reward you for that. So.
That is true.
Well, so while we're talking about something you're good at, and obviously High Tide is one of them, it is really apparent to me that you are hooked on this deck, and that it is almost a personal extension of yourself, and even more so than just the way you play it. There's also the deck, like the actual physical cards that you own. I've noted that you have almost everything in the deck altered at this point, and like I mentioned in the intro, you do alters. I don't know if professionally, but at least personally. So let's take a second here and talk about the alters you've done, your thoughts on like personalizing a deck, and especially in a format like Legacy where you can stick with a deck for years on end.
Well, there is nothing in the deck altered that by itself is more than like $5. I think Brainstorm's the most expensive card that's altered, so it's actually 40 out of 75 cards that are altered.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to alter Force of Wills and Candles, but there is someone out there who really wanted me to alter their entire High Tide deck, and I did that like a year and a half ago. So there is some altered Forces and Candles out there in the deck, and he still has the deck as far as I know at this point. And I made absolutely sure that he wanted me to do that. I asked him like several times as it was getting closer and closer, because you're altering a certain number of cards every day. But The reason why I altered the cards that I did is because I just wanted to make them look nice. And it's kind of, if you're playing and you're doing alters yourself, it's kind of like essentially a promotional tool or advertising. If you play against somebody, they see that you have alters, they'd be like, "Where'd you get those?" And then it's like, "Oh, I did them myself." "Oh, do you do alters?" And then it's like, "Yeah, I have a folder full of alters for trade if you want anything." And then there you go. It's essentially marketing, I guess. But I also had fun doing it. I wanted to have some nice stuff in my own deck. The only thing I could do to improve the deck now would be to get 12 Guru Islands and foil Force of Wills, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Oh, I mean, that's another, for some people, I think, a really appealing aspect of Legacy is like you get into it, you get your deck set up, like you can get your sort of your rough cut initial version, and then that's it. Like you have the deck. So if you want to continue personalizing or putting more time or money or whatever into it, there's a lot of avenues to go. You can foil. A lot of people like to foil their deck out. You can start looking for really rare versions, like you mentioned, Guru Islands or something like that, like special lands that functionally they're no different, but that doesn't mean they don't hold a special place in your heart, for just the aesthetic purposes. And then alterations is a very iconic way of personalizing it. So I think that's really cool, and I'm excited every time I get some alters done on my deck. So let's move on here. What decks would you say High Tide is best against? Like, what are its strengths, and what class of deck or what specific decks do you really want to play against?
Decks that don't have disruption are great, and most combo decks are going to be, I would say, maybe not dramatically favorable, but favorable or in your favor. Usually, if I lose to decks like Ant or Tess, it's because they killed me in the first couple turns. If they don't kill me, I'm going to spin Merchant Scroll to get a counterspell. I'm going to use Cunning Witch to get a counterspell. I'm going to use my cantrips. I'm just going to get so many counterspells that you will not go off. And eventually, if you don't go off, I will go off because I'm just going to draw into what I need to naturally. So I don't mind going against most combo decks. Probably the toughest combo deck right now that I could think of would be, excuse me, would be Show and Tell, because you can't Flush the Storm Sneak Attack, and if they do resolve, most combo decks are going to be faster than you. And if it goes later and later, they can get out their combo. Emrakul, if Emrakul swings, you're going to lose all your permanents. Gristlebrand is obviously they're getting card advantage at that point because you're not putting any pressure on their life. So Show and Tell is probably one of the tougher combo decks. Elves can be tricky depending on how good they're handed as well, because if you stop all the combo stuff, they can just kill you in the combat step. Like if I get Merchant Scroll and Cunning Wish with counters because they're like Natural Ordering and Green Sun's anything for Gaddock Teague, or Glimpse of Naturing, I have to stop that. So it's like, okay, we're both top decking, but you're swinging for 4 every turn with a bunch of 1/1s. I don't have forever, and if I don't draw into what I need to, I can die to that. So as far as aggressive decks go, I don't mind going against the Stoneforge decks. If you turn 2 Stoneforge into put in a Batterskull to untap, you're not really doing anything other than just putting out a slower clock, and I don't care about the life gain. That helps against other decks. It isn't not something that's going to sway it in your favor against me. Personally, I would not recommend even playing the Stoneforge Mystic on your turn 2. Keep your mana open for disruption, but I shouldn't say that, but I'm not really playing right now anyway, and it's when people sit down and do the testing, they're going to figure that out anyway. So,
sure.
But as far as that goes, any deck that's slower, the other tougher decks would be Miracles, because if they resolve a counterbalance, it's bad. If Miracles didn't have counterbalance in their deck, I wouldn't say it would be a bad matchup. It would definitely be improved. But if you resolve one counterbalance, it's like, okay, that's bad. If you resolve a second one, then it's just like, it's even worse. And if you're like, okay, now I have 2 counterbalances, so you can only wipe away 1, they can stack their deck with a 3 on top, and they have Sensei's Divining Tops in play. Like, at that point, it's just, it's over. They're like 99% to win.
Sure.
And then out of the Delver decks, because there's Rug Delver, there's Grixis Delver, there's Bug Delver, I would rather go up against Delver decks running Discard, because Brainstorm and Cantrips and Sensei's Tops help against Discard, whereas against pure counterspells, they don't help as much. So you're fighting through more disruption. The more pressure you can put on me during the combo turn, the harder it's going to be for me. And Discard usually doesn't hit me during my combo turn. It hits me on your turn in the turns leading up to it, or the turns after when there's recovery and whatnot. And then as far as the Delver decks go, really, I don't want to go against Rug, because Rug is pretty much just the fastest clock, and they have the most counterspells. They're just like, I'm going to get out my things, get out my guys, start swinging at you, and when you try to combo off, I'll just do as many counter spells as possible. A lot of times against Rug, if I don't win the first game, it just gets really bad after that. Because then they're bringing Pyroblast and Red Blast and more counter spells and Fluster Storms if they're not running it as a one of already. I don't think most do that, but usually there's 2 with the sideboard that I've seen. They'll bring them in, and it's a giant mess. The decks that I definitely want to go against are decks like, I mean, you don't see Maverick anymore. Jund has Disruption. Jund has Disruption, but it's a little bit different. The nice thing about Counterbalance is if you bring it in against Jund, most of their Disruption costs 1 or 2, so you can just nullify it once you resolve one of those. But they also run Abrupt Decay, so it can go back and forth. And then as far as like Death and Taxes will be another example. You probably do want to go against Death and Taxes. If they're smart and it goes long enough, if they get Athalia early, they can slow you down. 1 or 2 Hate Bears is not a big deal, but if they get out multiple Hate Bears, like I've lost to Maverick because they had out Choke, they had out Gaddock Teague, they had out Aven Mind Sensor, they had out Thalia, and they had out Aether Swarm Canonist. When you get out that much stuff, it's over, so. But basically, the toughest matchups would be Rug Delver, which is probably the least seen Delver deck right now. Miracles is going to be a tough matchup. And Dredge is also oh my god, Dredge is a horrible matchup because they're going to combo off before you, and in leading up to their combo, they're going to Cabal Therapy you two times, 3 times, 4 times. They're going to rip your hand apart, and then while you're trying to recover, they're like, okay, here's 10 2/2 zombies, and you're dead. And another matchup that you're probably never going to see, which is the worst matchup by far, is the Mono Blue Martyr Frost deck. It's my worst matchup because they run Spellstutter Sprite and Vidilion Click or like Snapcast. They run like all these creatures that are also counter spells, and then they run counter spells too. So it's like fighting 40 counter spells, and half of them have legs, and it's just like this is the worst matchup in the world. So, but that one probably won't come up. So
no, but a deck that's somewhat similar might be something like Fish. The Merfolk style decks, they tend to have a combination of both of those things. They'll have like Chalice and Curse Catcher, and Force of Wills and so on. So I imagine that could be somewhat problematic as well.
Fish can be tricky because they can have an Aether Vial out, and they can have Mutavault in play, and you could be at 20, and then like, okay, into your turn, Vial and a Fish. On their turn, they untap, they Vial in another Fish, they cast a 3rd Fish, they activate Mutavault. Suddenly they're swinging for 4 fish that are all 4/4s out of nowhere, and like you go from like 20 to dead. So Fish can be tricky, and Curse Catcher, I have tapped out with a Curse Catcher in play, but the combo took so long that both me and my opponent forgot about it, so I got lucky.
Hey, that's a legitimate way to win. Getting lucky. Ask me about that. But all right, so you've sort of hit on the good matchups, the bad matchups. It sounds like in summary, the decks that don't have interaction are very good, obviously, and that's true for most combo decks. If they can't interact with your key spells and stuff, then it's pretty much a bygone thing. You'll just win by default. Mediocre matches are the ones where they have some disruption, maybe like Death and Taxes or Miracles, and then the bad matchups are the ones where the decks are actively faster than you or bring packages of disruption, whether it be overloading on counter spells or just tons of permanent based hate. So let's say we are one of these matchups that sort of has a bad matchup versus High Tide. What are good sideboard cards that you would want to have available to fight back? Like what is the best hate cards against High Tide?
The cards that I personally the best hate cards against High Tide?
Yes, against. We'll get to the what do you have afterwards.
Okay. What I don't want to see is my opponent bringing in Fluster Storms. That is one of the toughest ones. The one that anybody can bring in, but doesn't matter as much, but I'm still noting it because any deck can run it, is Surgical Extraction and Mindbreak Trap. So you always have to be mindful that once you cast your 3rd spell, they might Mindbreak Trap even though they're not a counterspell deck. And Surgical Extraction can come in from any deck. So what you want to do every game too is make sure you have a High Tide in the sideboard and a Blue Sun Zenith in the main deck, so that if they extract High Tide, you can still Cunning Wish for 1 and combo off. And you can get it with Merchant Scroll, so you're fine. And if they extract Cunning Wish, you have a Blue Sun Zenith main deck, you still have access to a kill condition, so you're safe. So those can come up, but after that, really the people bringing in people bringing in more counter spells and more disruption, and Fluster Storm is probably the scariest one. Everything else is just a counter spell or a discard spell or a Red Blast, but Fluster Storm is, you can't just counter it back. I like running it for the same reasons why I don't want to run against it. So
sure, yeah, that makes sense. What about some of the permanent based hate cards like Aethersworn Canonist or I can't think of what's it called,
Thalia.
Trinisphere, something like that.
Okay. Oh, that will touch on something earlier when you mentioned artifacts and permanents coming into play like Chalice, Thorn of Amethyst, Trinisphere. The nice thing about decks that do that is they usually aren't killing you fast, which means you're probably going to be able to Cunning Wish for rebuild, and then you can bounce all their artifacts and then combo off on the next turn before they get a chance to replay them. But as far as cards like that go, you use Force of Will to stop, the first turn Chalice. If they get an early Chalice and your hand's full of cantrips, then you're just top decking, and that can be bad depending on their clock. And then as far as Aethersworn, like out of all the body hate bears, like you're going against Death and Taxes, you're going against Maverick, and it's like, okay, Thalia sucks. I'm probably auto-forcing Thalia if they're going to try to cast it on turn 2. But game 2 and game 3, I have to remember that, okay, now they could have Aethersworn Canonist, and that one's even worse than Thalia. I've comboed off through a Thalia. You just resolve a second High Tide early enough, and you have enough islands in play, and it's late enough in the game. You can just pay a +1 on everything, and it doesn't matter because you get so much mana, it's ridiculous. But Aethersworn Canonist literally, like, the scariest thing a Death and Taxes player can have against me is an untapped Aether Vial in play with 2 counters on it as I'm comboing. Because if I Time Spiral, and we both draw a new 7, and my storm count isn't high enough, at any point they can activate Vial to put in a hate bear like Spirit or Aethersworn Canonist, and in response, I have to suddenly become Solidarity and kill them in response, or stop the activation. And they're really, I mean, yeah, nobody's running Trick Bind, so.
No, that one's not as common. People, I assume, would prefer Stifle, but. Actually, you mentioned something I forgot to touch on, and we're going to come back to that in a second, is I know Solidarity is sort of like a variant on the deck, and like I said, we'll hit on that in a second, but first thing I want to do is, now we know what are some good hate cards against High Tide. What does High Tide have to fight back against the hate cards? You mentioned Rebuild, but I know there's others, so what are a few of those quickly?
Snap and Wipe Away. Snap bounces a creature and untaps 2 lands. If they have a Thalia out, you're paying +1 on everything, so the ability to bounce a hate bear and untap 2 islands can give you some of your mana back, and that can help a lot against that. Wipe Away is really nice because if they have Mother of Runes, they can't. If they see it coming, they can do premeditated activations to protect. But the main reason why Wipe Away is there is because of counterbalance. They resolve a turn 2 counterbalance. You're like, okay, I'll wait a couple turns, draw into what I need to. They're not going to kill me fast. Okay, Cunning Wish. If it resolves, I get Wipe Away. I bounce your counterbalance at the end of your turn, and then on my turn, I can try to combo off. The other one would be Rebuild, because there's a thing about running Hercule's Recall over Rebuild. The reason, or vice versa. The reason why I am bigger on Rebuild is because it doesn't target in case Leyline of Sanctity comes up, which is not common. Also, if you draw a new 7 after Time Spiral and you have no card draw, and one of yours is that artifact bounce spell, Rebuild can cycle, so it actually is card draw. That's never come up either, but it is a point. But the biggest point for me is that Chalice on 2 is easier to do than Chalice on 3. I've had times people resolve Chalice on 2 early enough, but it took so long for them to Chalice on 3 that I was able to get to Cunning Wish and then into Rebuild. So that's another reason why I would make the argument to run that card, because if you're Cunning Wishing for Hercule's Recall, you're paying 3 mana, you can probably rebuild anyway. So the mana cost is really like that. If anyone ever says, well, you should run Recall because it's cheaper, that's not an argument in my opinion. So.
Yeah, especially not for a deck that can generate like 50 or 90 or a million mana. Like, I don't know that 2 to 3 is your real problem. So, like I just mentioned, and I wanted to come back to, we discussed like a couple of the High Tide card variations, like whether you have candelabras or how many turnabouts and so on. But there's actually a variant of the deck called Solidarity, which I would also like you to hit on why it's called that, because that's sort of an interesting story, like many Legacy deck names. But also, what is the Solidarity deck? It's still a High Tide combo, but it's a little different. And how does it work compared to straight Time Spiral High Tide?
That one is all instants. You can literally wait until you can have combat damage lethal. Well, you can't stack combat. You can't stack combat damage anymore, but I was going down that road. But basically, like, let's say you're at 2, they lightning bolt you, and you can, in response, mill out their entire deck using nothing but instants, and then you Brain Freeze them or Blue Sun Zenith them. You can actually do it with Blue Sun Zenith. I didn't realize you could at first because I didn't think you'd be able to make enough mana, but you, in response, mill them, and then they can't draw a card. You force them to draw a card, so they die with your lethal to be dead on the stack, but they die first, so you win, which is, like, ridiculous. And how it does that is basically instead of running Time Spiral, it doesn't run Time Spiral, it doesn't run Merchant Scroll, and it doesn't run like permanent-based stuff like Candles or Tops if you're running Tops in your deck, and it doesn't run Preordain, and it doesn't run Ponder, which not running Preordain and Ponder and only having access to Brainstorm, I think that's one of the reasons, one of the number of reasons why the deck is weaker. But you do everything at instant speed, and you're running the key card in that deck that's not in this deck that stands out as a card called Reset. And for 2 blue mana, you can only cast it after the opponent's upkeep and only on their turn, and you use it to untap all your lands. Because it's so cheap, it's easier to actually get it started, but it's weaker overall because the card draw is less efficient. And when Dig Through Time was in the format, the deck did see a boost, but the problem is every single deck that ran Dig Through Time saw a boost, so it didn't actually really change anything. Right. I tried running it myself just because I wanted to see where I go with it, and after like 3 or 4 tournaments, I'm like, yeah, I'm going back to Time Spiral. So.
Yeah, and it's worth noting here that you get access to a few cards. Well, I guess technically High Tide would have access to these as well, but they're not efficient enough, I assume. But in Solidarity, you played things like Snapcaster Mage because it was important to be able to. Like you mentioned, you don't have as good or as many draw options. Like you have cards like Meditate maybe, but you can't draw a full new 7 like Time Spiral. So you end up using cards like Snapcaster Mage to simulate card advantage and to recast some of these spells to keep your draw engine going. But the one last thing I would like to talk about then is why is the deck called Solidarity?
I have been told this more than once, and I never remember when it comes up. But I do know that... Shoot, I don't actually know.
Okay, so the story I heard, or what I have come to believe, is that one of the earliest successful versions of the deck actually ran the white instant Solidarity, the card Solidarity, in its sideboard. Even though it was completely uncastable and unusable in the deck, it was simply sort of I guess a joke, if you will. Like it's in the sideboard. Here's this goofy card that no one would ever actually play in competitive Magic, and it's the name of my deck. And for those who don't know, I think Solidarity, if I remember, it's something like a 4 mana instant that gives your creatures like a toughness boost. And this is a deck that, when it first was first created, didn't even have creatures in it. So it was literally completely useless and uncastable, which I think...
Yeah, it's 2 and 1 white. All creatures you control get +0/+5.
There you go. What kind of nonsense is that?
But yeah, I remember that it was not a serious thing. It was something along the lines of a joke, being in a sideboard of a deck that was mentioned by someone else just to do it, to fill up a slot or something like that. But I always remember that as the story. And about a year or 2 ago, somebody was like, no, that's actually not the story. And they told me the story, and I don't remember it. I just remember what I remember remembering, which was not technically accurate. So at this point, I'm not sure what the actual answer is, but I know it's not what I am saying, because when I've said that in the past, someone corrected me. I can't remember what the actual answer was. Well, but it was something similar.
Yeah, I was gonna say perhaps this is just the Paul Bunyan style thing where the myth and the story is more important than the actual truth. It's not what really happened, it's just what people believe. That's what really matters.
Yeah, people are still talking about it, so someone did something right somewhere.
That's right. So anyway, let's go back to High Tide here, and I want to talk about people who want to give the deck a try. Would you, first of all, would you recommend it to a legacy player, a new player or a veteran alike? And do you think a certain type of player should probably give it a consideration over another? Like what type of person do you have to be, and don't say crazy, to want to play High Tide?
The answers to that are both yes and no. If you're brand new to the format, the problem with saying that you should be, like, let's say you're brand new to the Legacy, you're just getting in, you have no idea what to play, and you see that there's like all kinds of stuff out there. If anyone sits down with you at that point and says you should play this deck, I believe that is incorrect, because you don't even know all the options first. You should always figure out all your options before going in. And before you even do that, you should know the metagame and know what's going on. So for me personally, I sat down and did a ton of research, and I was like, okay, these are the number of decks that have top 8'd this many times, and these numbers, and so on and so on and so on. It's just metagaming is all it is. Once you figure all that out, you're going to kind of get a window into what each deck offers. And I think if you, like, for each person or each personality that you have, we're all going to be drawn to a little bit of different things. Some people are just going to be like, I want to play the best deck in the room. I don't care what it is. Some people are going to want to play their own thing and not care what the best decks are in the room. They're going to be the complete opposite. And then other people will probably sit down and look at everything. I'm guessing most people will sit down and look at everything, and they're going to play something that they know can win, but something that they enjoy. Nobody like wants to be playing, you know, it's like, okay, I'm playing to win, but I'm not enjoying it, and this deck is really, really boring. Like, there's probably people, like, I'm probably in the group of people that, like, if Rug is the best deck, I'll never play Rug. It's just too boring. I'm sorry.
Sure.
So, but, like, as far as once you get to the point of deciding why you should or shouldn't play that deck, I think in the end you should play it because it appeals to you, because you like playing it, and you like, there's combo decks, there's prison style decks, there's aggro decks, there's control decks. I mean, if you want to get into sub-archetypes, you could probably say there's 10 different types of decks out there. But as far as High Tide goes, play it. I say play it because you want to play it, which is something that kind of answers itself. Basically, if you are playing High Tide because you want to, you're going to know that on your own. You're not really going to need anyone to tell you that. But it is a unique combo deck. It's a different type of strategy if you like something that's different and stands out. And also, I feel it's very. Matthias Hunt said once in coverage, he said that it's a combo deck for people who like to play safer combo decks, because unlike, you know, going off blindly, you can wait as long as possible and then go, okay, this is my last turn to go off. I picked up as many counter spells as I could. I'm going to combo off now, and either I have it or I don't. And that's one thing I really liked about the deck, is because there's so much variance in the game. I like decks that play themselves. The less work I have to do, the easier it's going to be on me, because I'm already. Like, in Magic, I don't know if there's such thing as a perfect tournament, because, like, even tournaments where you do really good, you can look back and go, yeah, I made it, but I had this game where I could have did this better. I had this game where I could have did this better, et cetera, et cetera. I had a match where I won the match, but I had one game I lost, and it shouldn't have even gone to a game 3. You know, I mean, we're probably our own worst critics when it comes down to all that stuff. But we're going to notice the stuff that stands out versus the stuff where it's like, yeah, we just had, you know, wins. And like, the games I always remember are either the really, really crazy games that are just insane, or unique matchups that stand out, or matchups where there was gameplay that happened and you were probably on the end of it where you didn't do as well, so you're going to be thinking about it a little bit more, because it's like, oh, I wish I would have won that game and I lost because of this, and all I had to do was this to do that, and there you go. So,
well, while you're on the topic of really memorable moments playing a deck, let's hear one. Tell us about one of your favorite times or favorite moments when you were playing High Tide. Tell us, like, how it happened, what you were doing, and why it's special.
I have a lot of, like, when I go to tournaments especially, I have a couple of them that are on camera, which is kind of nice. One of them, like, after a certain point, I kind of set myself, like, mini goals. I'm like, I want to do this on camera, and I want to try to do this until I get to the point where I can do it. And I had one game where I used Capsize with Candelabra to produce infinite mana, so I bounced all of my opponent's permanents, and then I brain freeze their entire deck away. So their entire deck was in their graveyard, they had no permanents in play, and all their cards in their hand, and then I blue sunned them with nothing in play and no deck left. Another one I was able to do was I blue sun Zenith my opponent without going infinite. It was just tapping and untapping a ridiculous number of times, and I blue sunned them for like a few hundred. Off camera, the record, I believe, was in Cincinnati. Yeah, it was Cincinnati. I was against Death and Taxes player, and sometimes I'll ask at the end of a game, if I know that the match is going to be over, it's the last game, and there's time left, I will say, okay, do you care if I go nuts? And if they say, yeah, you can go nuts, I will literally use Blue Sun Zenith. I'll count my deck and be like, okay, I have 47 cards, I have 37 cards. I'm going to draw that many cards. I have my entire deck in my hand. I'm going to cast all my High Tides, tap and untap every single time that I can, and then I will untap tap and untap all my candles, use Turnabout to untap them all to do it again, and I will try to blue sun for as high as possible, and I've done it for over 2,000 before without going infinite. It's literally just tapping and untapping and casting as many High Tides as you can. I think Islands are tapping for like 14 or 16 at the end of it or something crazy. So I've had stuff like that happen that stands out, and it's like, it's something fun. It's like the game's over. Let's just have some fun with it and see if we can go nuts. And I've done over 2,000 a couple times, but that doesn't come up too often. A lot of times I don't want to risk casting another time spiral and drawing dead anyway. So a lot of times it'll only be for like a few hundred versus going absolutely insane. I've had some not so great moments that stand out when you ask like memorable. Memorable doesn't mean great.
Sure.
It also means some moments I had that were not so great. I have fetched land at 1 life before, and I fetched and I looked at a new top 3 or something like that, and then like 30 seconds later, my opponent, it was on their turn, and I think they did a fetch. Something reminded them that I fetched, or no, I think they went to attack me. Something happened where it came up and they were like, "Wait, weren't you at 1 life?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah." And then like I paused for a second and I realized what was going on. I'm like, I guess that's it. And there was nothing you could do. You're like multiple steps in. There's no reason to even call a judge. You know you're dead. You know you messed up and you're dead. There's no way you can go back on that once you're into the next turn. I've also Spirit of the Labyrinth. When Spirit of the Labyrinth came out, I preordained and they cast Spirit, and I'm like, okay, I have Merchant Scroll. It doesn't draw. It puts it in my hand, so I could still get the combo piece High Tide. I could still go off. I'm like 18 or 19. It's going to take a while for the Spirit to kill me. All I have to do is just draw into more islands and you know, wait to draw into what I need to for bounce. And so I just I saw Spirit, saw that it was annoying. I couldn't draw off of it other than normal drawing. Then I completely forgot what it did, took my turn, drew a card, cast Preordain, scryed 2, put 2 to the bottom, drew a card, and I immediately got a game loss.
Oh, yeah, the old extra cards.
I've also hit a camera. I don't know if you remember that or not, but
yeah, I think I've seen that where you get really into it and then accidentally bump the camera.
Yeah, me and Matt Hoey were playing. He was playing Rug. We both mulliganed to 5, and it was insane because we were both mulliganing down so low. And then I saw my hand of 5 and saw that I had to mulligan again, and I just like waved my arms up like, this is ridiculous, and the camera and my arm, and it just, I thought I turned the camera around. I didn't realize it didn't really do anything, but I wasn't sure what happened, and it was kind of funny. But that was at Indianapolis back in 2014, so yeah, that was interesting. So all kinds of stuff happens. If you're involved in something enough, you're going to have stuff come up where you're going to remember things like that. So
those are great. Yeah, that's a lot of fun. So while we're talking about messing with cameras, I'm doing a good job of segueing here, or maybe I'm not. Leave me comments in the YouTube, and I'll know how well I did. But anyway, while we're talking about cameras, I have seen a video you recently produced, and I've seen you wandering around some tournaments here, gathering footage, I assume, for, I guess it's sort of a documentary you've been producing. The first episode was filmed at the Grand Prix in Pittsburgh just about a few weeks ago. So enlighten us. What is this project? What is it about, and what's it for?
Well, it's probably the reason why I've been saying that officially over the past month I've stopped playing. Somehow over the past year, I would say about a year ago, I found myself after like a week being online, and I realized that I had spent like every day of that week online looking up like psychic magic tricks and stuff and card tricks. And for some reason, it just like, it's usually when people say, yeah, this is something I've been into since I was a kid or whatever. For me, for some reason, it happened, I guess, like a year ago in my early 30s. But since then, I've been learning stuff, and then you practice stuff and you put stuff together, and I'm going to all these events, and I'm like, okay, well, let's see if I could do some of this stuff live. So I practiced stuff in front of people, and I got different reactions, and I was like, okay, I can do this, and this is something I enjoy doing, and it's fun. Just, you know, the same reason why we're all there for the game, because we're in the room to play the game because we enjoy it. But I realized that, you know, okay, I've gone this far with it. Now what do I do? And it's like, well, if you're a comedian, you can go to comedy clubs, but you don't really have that if you're performing like mentalism or magician. It's just trickery is all it is. Sure. But, you know, for me, there's like, I can't think of anywhere to go for that. And it's like, well, you kind of want to do this. So it's like, I'll just do my own thing, put it together, put it on the internet. And then, so I'm doing like some effects, but I want it to be entertaining. Like for me, doing it and putting it together, I'm always thinking about how it would look if I'm part of the audience, if I'm watching it. I'd want to watch something I wouldn't want to watch something that's boring or it's just somebody doing tricks. You want actual entertainment. Mm-hmm. So like I did like some comedy stuff in it because I probably think that I'm funnier than I am, or because I laugh at myself a lot or whatever. But I definitely got some comments because that's the biggest thing. Our self perception and how others perceive us are not going to be the same thing. So in doing it, it's like I have no idea how this is going to go, where it's going to go, but I'm going to do it anyway because I'm never going to know if I don't try. I don't know if you can relate to that. Maybe when you first started doing this, you were like, how did you, if I may ask, when you got into this?
So what made me get started on the podcast?
Yes.
Really, I have grown to like Legacy so much, and it's the format, like, above all others that I want to play, that I felt like there was information and there was like enjoyment of the format that I think a lot of people just didn't know or they don't have access to, whether it be like not having a deck, not having a play group, not having like the finances at the time to do it, or just generally not knowing much about the format. And I thought, well, maybe I'm not the best person for this task, but I'm gonna give it a try. I'm gonna tell people about Legacy, and I'm gonna get guests who know and love the format and want to talk about it. And so far, I think it's gone well, and I really hope that everybody enjoys it. And yeah, so I guess in a lot of ways, it's sort of a self-expression of a personal desire, a personal love for something, and this is the result. Here we are.
All right. Well, yeah, I guess that, yeah. So that does. There are relatable things on both sides. The same thing for me. It's something that I enjoy and something that I like doing. And there's like going back to the specifics of the videos themselves. Like overall, I want it to be something that people will enjoy watching. So there's a humorous side. There's like a thrill side to it. And if you're into like magicianry and stuff like that, it's not really like sleight of hand stuff. Like
Sure.
I just like card tricks are neat, but to me that's not what's as exciting. Like in either case, and then like there's also like a serious side to it. I was actually like asking people like the life that you have, what does it mean to you? Because that's something like we all have our own perspectives on our own reality, and we all see things the way that we see things. We all have our own perceptions, and we all value life at the way that we do. And I think that's something that for some reason for me, that's just like something that's important. And it's like, well, if I'm going to do something like this and, I'm going to have an audience, like I'd like to touch at least a little bit on the things that are important. So it has a little bit of everything, but the main theme is Feline Longmore, psychic entertainer. There you go.
There you go. So do you plan to make more videos? Will they have like a similar subject matter?
Yes. I did do some stuff from Worcester this weekend, but it was a shorter weekend. And I also, with it being Legacy, I had to focus on trading. So I don't have as much stuff as I did from Pittsburgh. But each show I go to, I'll probably always have a camera with me. And I'll do a minimum of something. I'll always be doing something. And if I come back from a weekend, maybe I'll upload like 20 minutes worth of stuff. Maybe I'll upload, 2 or 3 effects for 3 minutes. But I always want to put up something. And I have stuff from Worcester that I'm going through editing with right now that should be up by the end of the week. Usually it takes about a week. Well, I say usually, I'm basing this on one event.
No, I know what you're saying.
It took me about a week. It took me over a week. So I would say, probably by Monday I should have up something from Worcester. It won't be as much as the other one. And also it's a learning process. After I put up my first video, I asked for some feedback and I was told, you can improve on the text. The text was hard to read. So I was like, okay. Another one, someone said when the music was on, it was a little louder than they wanted it to be. So I can fix that. And another thing was some of the editing. Like I can improve on the, I guess, as you said earlier, segues or transitioning, but you've been doing fine on that on your end. So
I'm a little more practice.
There's different things that I know I can improve, but I know that I can't do anything at all if I don't at least try. And I think that's what matters. So.
Right on. So
yeah,
I was gonna say, where can people find these videos? Actually, does the program or the videos you're making, does it have like a title? Is it a series at this point? Do you think that'll be the like mine? Like we're on Legacy's Allure right now. So are you gonna have something, a title similar to that people can search for it or find it?
Actually, I put it on a YouTube channel at Feline011 if you want to watch it. It's also linked to my Twitter and Facebook. And I wasn't sure what to title it until after I completed the first episode and put it up. And YouTube's like, what are you going to title it? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. So I just titled it Life is Amazing because I think it is. And so after that, it's episode 00 pilot. And then I'll just go from there. And it'll be continue to be titled that based on episodes, based on cities, and I'll probably always, well, I'll be posting it on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. If you follow me on any of those, then cool. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And check the description of this video if you want to find links or more info on High Tide or Felines video series.
Yeah, so thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, as far as that goes, I don't, like I said, I don't know where it will go. I don't know if I'm going to do 100 episodes or 10, but I'm definitely doing. I have stuff planned for the rest of the year. All the events I'm going to go to, I'll probably always be doing something. And the biggest thing is I want to be able to keep. One person noted to me, they said, when you do new stuff, make sure you do different effects. Don't do the same thing. And it's like, don't worry. I've spent like way too much money on like books and DVDs. I have like a small library or bookcase full of like mind reading and prediction effects. So I won't run out of stuff. But they're all tricks. But I just think it's really, really neat. I like the psychology behind it, like why it works, why people think it's fascinating, and I like figuring that stuff out, and I like doing that, and it's just fun and enjoyable. So
that's really great. Awesome. I'm glad you took the plunge.
Thank you. Sorry for coughing.
It's all right. It happens. It's camera coughs.
I'll go with that.
All right. Well, Feline, I've enjoyed talking with you today. I've had a lot of fun. I think your passion and your dedication to legacy, magic, and just everything is really awesome. So thank you for taking the time out to join us today and talking about High Tide.
Yeah, thank you for having me on here, and thank you for everyone for listening, and congrats on I mean, you've been doing this for how long exactly have you been doing this for? Like over
I think this is like excuse me, I think this is like episode 19, so it's been going a while now.
That's not quite a year, but you're approaching a year, correct?
Maybe it's at least 6 months, I think. It's been going. It's fun. Cool. I like it.
Yeah. Well, I'll definitely be tuning in for the next episode.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, I know that you have it set up on YouTube, and after talking and whatnot, I know where to find you. So.
Right on.
And then as far as legacy goes, that's where all of us are. So.
Indeed. Thanks again for joining us. And thank you to all of our listeners and viewers. It has been my pleasure to bring you this episode of Legacies of Allure. If you like what you heard today, please subscribe and feel free to leave us feedback on our YouTube page. Or you can message me directly at mtgtraininggrounds@gmail.com. Like us on Facebook at the user MTG Training Grounds, and follow us on Twitter at @MTG_TR Grounds. I'm Zachary Cuck.